The following is a presentation of the St. Louis Chess Club. Round 7 of the Summer Classic here in St. Louis. It was peace on earth for Group A, where every game was drawn. Only half points stagger Vasif Durabaili, Varujan and Sam Sevian in the standings. 2 victories in Group B, including J.J. Alimirandi keeping his first place hopes alive. Meanwhile, after a draw with Tukhaev, Kamil Dragun could clinch his field with 1 round to spare. Coverage of Round 8, the penultimate round, starts now. 20 international chess professionals compete in St. Louis as USChessChamps.com presents the first ever Summer Chess Classic.
Hello everyone, welcome to the St. Louis Chess Club studio and the 2018 Summer Chess Classic. I am Women Grandmaster Katerina Nemcova and I'm joined by International Master Eric Rosen. Today we have round 8 of the tournament, which leaves us only with last round tomorrow. Let's review the results from the last round to see who is closest to win the tournament.
Yeah, we had a very peaceful day yesterday in Group A, all draws, so not too much changing in the standings, but we can see that if we take a look at the standings, we can see Vasif Durabaili still leading Group A with a very impressive 5.5 out of 7 points. Varujan right behind Vasif in clear second place with 5 points, and Sam Sevian right behind Var in third place with 4.5 out of 7 points.
And the results for Group B. We had Robert Aghasaryan having a draw against Dinara Saduakasova, Vladimir Belov scoring his first point against Josh Friedel, J.J. Alimirandi keeping his eyes on the first place by beating Tukhaev Abrahamyan, and Andrei Tukhaev drawing against Kamil Dragun, Alejandro Ramirez having a draw against Sergei Matsenko. This brings us to standings. And we see Kamil Dragun is still the sole leader of the Group B with 5 points out of 7. And we have a 4-way tie for the second place where J.J. Alimirandi, Andrei Tukhaev, Robert Aghasaryan and Sergei Matsenko all have 4 points.
And we should note that Kamil Dragun, if everything goes his way, he could clinch victory today if he wins and the players behind him stumble. But I think that's pretty unlikely given there's so many players tied for second place. So Group B is likely going to come down to tomorrow's final round. And
to review the tournament format, we have 2 10-player round robins with a time control of 90 minutes for 40 moves plus 30 minutes for the remainder of the game with a 30-second increment from move 1.
And we should keep in mind there is a 30-move no-draw rule, meaning players cannot agree to a draw before move 30. However, there is an exception if the game ends in 3-fold repetition. Players can accept or have a draw before move 30, and we've seen that a few times throughout this tournament.
And as we said before, tomorrow is the last round, so join us early. The game is starting at 11 a.m. Central Time, because if there is a tie, if there is a playoff, it will be, we are making a space which will start at 5 p.m.
That's right, so please set your alarm clocks earlier, 2 hours earlier for that matter, and we'll begin the broadcast tomorrow at 1:30 p.m. St. Louis time.
And the pairings for Group A.
Yeah, we have some exciting matchups underway. Benjamin Bach against Peter Prohaska, Yaroslav Zherebukh against tournament leader Vasif Durabaili, Sam Sevian against Varujan, Daniel Friedman drawing Rinat Jumabayev in a very quick game, and Alexander Indjic against Jeffrey Zhang.
And the key matchup for today is Sam Sevian against Varujan, 2 very strong American grandmasters. Varujan has not lost a game yet, but his position did not look very pleasant, so let's glance at the game.
That's right, we have clear second place versus clear third place, and both players I'm sure really wanting to win today to catch up to Vasif Durabaili. But if we take a look at the position, I mean, the structure is relatively symmetrical, lots of tension along the e-file, both sides have doubled up their rooks, and I'm not sure if either side has much to play for in this position. Maybe we can argue Sam's position is a bit more pleasant, more active queen on b5, pressuring both the d5 and b7 pawns, but anything to play for White?
White would really like to have dark square bishop and control some dark square some dark squares, but because there are no bishops, I think it's very hard to proceed and maybe go for an advantage.
That's right, and both players managing their time pretty well, still far away from time trouble, so this could be a longer fight, but if I had to put money on this game, I would predict a relatively peaceful draw.
So let's glance at the pairings for Group B. We have some exciting matches ahead of us. Dinara Sadoakasova playing against Andrei Matsenko, Kamil Dragun, the leader, playing against Alejandro Ramirez, Tatev Abrahamyan against Andrei Stukopin. We already have a result from the game George Fredel against JJ Ali Marandi. It was a rather uneventful game. They agreed on a draw. And the last board is Robert Agasaryan against Vladimir Belos.
Right, and the key matchup of today is Kamil Dragun against Alejandro Ramirez. Tournament leader, I'm sure, looking for blood in this game. Kamil has the white pieces, and if we take a look at the position, I would have to be happy with the white side. We can see both players there pondering the position. It is Alejandro's move. He doesn't seem too pleased. I do want to go back and show a very instructive moment from this game. Going back to move 21 after knight b6, white played the rather ambitious and very explosive pawn f5, trying to rip apart the center with black's king still on e8. And if we go forward to see how the game continued after kingside castle, f take e6, f take e6, queen e4, it looks like black is going to be left with this kind of long-term weakness on e6.
And we discussed this position before the broadcast, and we also mentioned how white is just perfect with his pieces. The rooks are dominating the d-file. There are no weaknesses in white's camp. And the knight on b6 is very restricted. It doesn't have really a good spot to go to.
That's right. A few more moves have been played after rook f e8, queen d4, rook bc8, queen d6, queen b7, and queen e5 brings us to the current position. I might have to argue that white has some weakness, especially with these pieces lined up on the c-file, and having committed to b3, this knight is a bit less defended, but I mean, white's position seems very stable, and it seems like white is trying to play a positional game. We saw Kamil going for this queen trade. If queens did come off the board, it would be just a much more pleasant positional endgame for white. So perhaps Alejandro is trying to keep queens on the board to try and create some attacking chances later on.
But Kamil is the leader of Group B. It looks like he's happy with this position. So let's review the prizes for the tournament to see what players are fighting for.
Yeah, we have a very generous prize fund for Group A, $22,000 on the line, $6,000 for first place. And it's going to come down to the final rounds to see who can take home big bucks.
And the prize fund for Group B, we have a total of $40,000, and the first prize, the winner takes home $4,000. So far it looks like Kamil is the closest one to go, but we have to keep in mind that Sergei Matsenko is still playing him tomorrow, so anything can happen.
That's right. I think if Sergei can win his last 2 rounds, we'll at least have a share at first place. So sometimes towards the end of the tournament, you don't want to get, or you don't want to have the money being the only thing on your mind. I've been in this situation many times before, and when you start thinking about money and how much you could actually win if you take first place, then it can have a negative impact on your chess playing.
So let's go to see some games. I thought there is a very interesting position between Alexander Indjic and Jeffrey Zhang.
Yeah, let me find that game. Very imbalanced position. We can take a look at the current situation. After rook e7, it looks like white has everything to play for. I actually want to go back and show a somewhat interesting and weird moment in this game. Around move 16, there was a bit of dancing with both sides. It looked like there was almost a repetition about to be played after queen f4, knight h5, queen e3, the knight returned to f6, the queen returned to f4, the knight returned to h5. But Alexander Indjic turned down the repetition with a fresh move here, queen g5, and after knight to f6, Indjic did not retreat the queen and just take the draw. He went for the very ambitious pawn d5, going for the central expansion. And if we see how the game unfolded after pawn take e5, Alexander Indjic continued his aggression with pawn e5, maybe somewhat of a pawn sacrifice, lunging forward with the pawn, making the knight retreat, also leaving black's bishop pretty depressed on b7.
I think this is a very nice idea to really look at d5, pawn takes d5 and e5. The pawn on d5 is extra, black is pawn up. But we have to keep in mind how good this pawn or how bad this pawn is. My coach used to say, you know, this is a double agent. It is up. It is like, it looks like it's black, but maybe it's playing for the white camp because it's blocking the bishop on b7. It does not allow black pieces to have cooperation, and suddenly maybe we can see moves like rook d4, rook g4, and creating some pressure on the king side.
I very much agree. This pawn on d5, not only is it blocking black's bishop on b7, but it's just a long-term weakness. White can win it back at any point. I like the move Indjic chose in this position, queen h5, avoiding any queen trade. Following the very general principle in chess, when you're the one attacking, you want to keep queens on the board to maximize your attacking chances. And already we can see some targets for white in the position, this pawn on f7 and this pawn on h7. Very easy for white to attack, not only with the queen and the bishop kind of targeting f7, but also the potential of knight g5 in the position. Seems like a fun and lively position for Indjic.
And sometimes we can also glance at the clock to see what's happening. We see Jeffrey Zhang having only 17 minutes, whereas Alexander Indjic still has almost 30 minutes to go before the move 40. So black will have to also figure out how to find the best moves while having only 17 minutes to go.
Yeah, let's get to the current position. A few more moves have been played after rook c7. Bishop a4, maybe trying to restrict the knight, create a somewhat annoying pin. So Jeffrey responded with rook e7, getting out of the pin. Brings us to the current position. We can see it's Alexander Indjic's move, and he looks like a monster hovering over the board there. I do want to point out a fun fact. I believe he's the tallest grandmaster in the world, so maybe a somewhat intimidating opponent to sit across from.
So when we see this position, I think there are some interesting options that white can do. So let's say knight g5 is one option. There's an interesting line. If white goes knight g5 and black responds with h6, we can maybe do even knight takes f7 with the idea of playing e6.
That's a nice line. Not really a sacrifice given that white is immediately winning back material. And if black wanted to save the rook with a move like rook e7, white could happily capture on d7. And his pawn on d7, just a huge nuisance in black's position, given that it is defended by the bishop. And perhaps white could go for some potential pawn promotion tactics with the very scary queen e8.
Unfortunately, knight g5 just happened, but most likely black is not going to respond with h6, but there is just a safe move, knight f8, where black is defending the h7 square and also controlling the e6.
Yeah, I think knight f8 will be most likely in this position, not giving white any tackle opportunities. Very safe and solid move, not to mention it unleashes the queen to maybe support the d5 pawn a bit more. And now it becomes a question, how does white continue from here? Is there a breakthrough move? Does white want to maybe look for some slow expansion move?
And we see that knight f8 happened in the game. Jeffrey responded pretty quickly with this rather obvious move where we are defending the pawn on h7, defending e6, and now it's white who has to decide how to advance other pieces, maybe how to bring more pieces to the attack.
Yeah, whenever you're attacking, I like to compare it to a party where you want to just invite everyone to the party and make sure everyone has a good time. I was expecting Indjic to maybe try and improve one of the rooks, maybe consider some type of rook lift, or even maybe play a move like rook d2 to prepare bishop c2. But he chose a different idea, very interesting move, maybe somewhat unexpected, knight to e4, perhaps going for the improvement of the knight. Any thoughts about this move?
I mean, it's interesting to see that the knight on g5 is very active, but after knight f8, it's running out of any strong threats because h7 is defended, e6 is defended. So maybe it's time to put the knight somewhere else. And knight e4 has some threats with maybe knight f6 and attacking the king, but also really going to d6 square where it can create more pressure on in black's camp.
No, I love this idea of getting the knight to d6 because it's such a weak square in black's position, and if the knight lands on d6, it's such a hard piece to remove given it is supported by the pawn, and black only has a light squared bishop, so the bishop has no way of actually fighting for the d6 square.
This is such a difficult position for black. I think black would be much happier if the pawn was not on d5, if the pieces were somewhat different. So I think Alexander Indjic chose a very nice idea of sacrificing a pawn, having some advantage, and now really making sure that his pieces have the best cooperation they can possibly have so they can attack.
Yeah, I really have to admire Indjic's play so far, making use of his attacking resources. And now Jeffrey's under pressure. They have about 14 moves to make until time control, and Jeffrey is just over 15 minutes, so that's not a lot of time to think, especially when there's critical moments and he has difficult decisions to make when it comes to defending White's attack.
So let's move on maybe to the tournament B endgame Dinara Saduakasova, Sergei Matsenko, the first board in Group B.
Right. I was taking a look at this game earlier, and it seemed like Dinara got a position which really suited her style. Very nice and stable pawn in e5, seizing a lot of space in the position. Rook's very well placed on the center files. But we can see things are heating up after the move pawn f4, attacking the queen. It looks like Dinara has to move the queen to somewhere safe. But I do admire White's position. Just seems like White has more space, especially with this this target on d7. It's just a backwards pawn, already being attacked by both the rook on d1 and the knight on b6. I think we can maybe expect a move like queen b3 here.
I agree. I mean, when we look at this position, we see that White did not do anything wrong. The rooks are open on open files, the bishop is developed, knight is developed. The pawn on e5, I think we have to stress how important this pawn is, because it's blocking two black pawns which cannot fight for the center. And suddenly we see black pieces that are not coordinated, the knight on g7, the knight on b8. I think White must be pleased with this position. And also, if we look at the time, we see Dinara having 27 minutes and Sergei Matsenko having only 14 minutes for last 16 moves.
That's right. When I teach some newer and maybe lesser experienced players, I like to talk about piece harmony, finding ideal squares for your pieces so they can work together to pressure your opponent. In this case, I think White has just amazing piece harmony, lots of pieces supporting each other, while Black just has pieces scattered all over the place, not really having a cohesive plan. So we do have one more move played. Queen b3 was not played. Instead, Dinara opted for the very logical queen d3, hitting the rook on c4, and also adding some pressure along the d file.
So suddenly the rook is attacked, and it cannot even be defended, something like rook a c7, because we have to keep in mind that the knight on b6 is also attacking the rook. So there must be a retreat with the rook. But where to go?
I mean, the only... actually, we do have a move played, rook to c5. I was actually expecting perhaps a more passive rook to c7, but rook c5, slightly more active square, and we should keep in mind that the pawn in d7 is defended 3 times by the rook on a7, the knight, and the queen, so White can't immediately take it, but I would still be very happy with White in this position, just given the setup of the pieces.
So do you think it is time to maybe move the white pawns on the queen side, because all other pieces seems to have very good position, very good spaces, so maybe b4 and go after the rook?
I do like this move b4. If you can expand with tempo, why not? We should keep in mind that White's knight on b6 is currently hanging, so it might be favorable for White to play a counter-attacking move rather than retreating the knight, given that the knight is adding a lot of pressure to Black's position.
So let's just play it out. So let's say I play b4, where Black can go with the rook.
The rook doesn't have too many safety spots. I would think either rook b5 or rook to c7. Both moves don't seem too appealing.
I feel like if you go rook c7, my goal would be really go to a4 b5 to completely restrict the a4 b5 to completely restrict the knight on b8, because if we control c6 and a6 squares, then the knight is just totally out of the game.
Oh, that's a very interesting positional idea. And yeah, the problem with rook c7 is it cuts off the attack from the queen on d8. So maybe we'll see a move like rook b5, but I do want to note that White has a very nice positional maneuver, similar to the game that we just saw with Alexander Indjic against Jeffrey Zhang. The very simple knight c4, followed by knight d6, and the knight is just on a beautiful outpost square deep in Black's territory. So this might be a theme so far this round, just having a very powerful knight outpost.
d6 a very important square. So let's move on to a different game. Here we see that White has some somewhat advantage.
Maybe we can go back to Group A and take a look at the tournament leader, Vasyl Darbeli, having the black pieces against Yaroslav Zherebukh. And it was a very interesting position earlier. It looks like some dust has settled, and both sides have a lot of pieces on the king side. Queen f5 just played, offering a queen trade, but things might liquidate into some kind of drawish ending. Any thoughts about this position?
We also have to keep in mind that the pawn on b7 can one day just go and run for a queen. So I always like when the pawn can go, the bishops are supporting it. So I wonder if white wants to exchange queens or not.
Right, I would have to argue that, I mean, white's king feels a bit safer given the bishop on g2, just given like this classic Fianchetto setup. So I guess it's a question, can white find some useful square for the queen on f4? Maybe a move like queen to b8, going for some attack along the back rank, given that this bishop on f8 would be pinned.
And also, like, we can go after the knight on g4. If we play h3, force the knight to go away, then we suddenly have e5 square, then suddenly maybe bishop h6 threats.
That's true. h3 would probably be the threat in the position, just trying to remove the knight on g4 from defending the black camp. Interesting position. I'm sure Vasif is, I'm sure Yaro is considering this this interesting queen b8 move. We should also note that white would be attacking the pawn on b7, so maybe a couple different threats for the white side.
The other idea is that if we take and exchange the queens immediately,
say queen take f5,
bishop takes f5, h3, now again forcing the knight to go away.
So white has some initiative here.
We can have knight e5 coming right now with the threat of taking the pawn on b7. And if you are black and you decide to take the pawn on d4, I mean, my bishop is immediately going to c3, and I don't know if maybe I can have some counterplay on the diagonal.
It's an interesting line, maybe some kind of temporary pawn sacrifice, given that white is just keeping the initiative. And I think this is what we're seeing in many of these lines, where white is making continual threats, trying to improve the pieces while force black's pieces back. But it's still a question if is white getting anything in these sorts of lines where things are just getting traded. And I mean, if the b7 pawn comes off the board and white's not winning anything more, it could just be a very drawish position.
I agree. With every trade, I mean, it looks like we are getting into more equal and drawish position.
So maybe we can move on to another game. Very interesting positional battle which catches my eye is a fight between Peter Prohaska and Benjamin Bach. Benjamin with the white pieces. And this just looks like positional heaven for white. I mean, look at this amazing post on c5 for the rook. Black's pawn structure is far less than optimal given there's a backward pawn, double pawns, isolated pawn on a5. Seems like white has everything going for him in this game. We
had, I believe, 2 rook endgames yesterday. They both finished in a draw. So every time there's a rook endgame, there is a big chance that it can end up in a decisive result. But we do have to keep in mind that if you have active rook, if you control maybe the c file here, you are having some advantage, and you are the one who is pushing for maybe win.
Right, there is an infamous saying that all rook endings are drawn, but I'm sure many strong players would disagree with that, including Magnus Carlsen. And this just seems like a very easy position to play for white. I mean, put the rooks on the c file, maybe transfer the queen to a4, and I mean there's just a couple long-term targets, and it's going to be very difficult for black to defend all the pawn weaknesses in the position.
So I see some changes in the game. Alexander Indjic and Jeffrey Zhang, there are no longer bishops on the board. So can we just see what happened there?
Yeah, let's see what happened, because white did achieve the knight on d6, but going back to the position after knight e4, bishop c6 played, and this is a surprising decision from Alexander. I would expect him to try and keep his bishop on the board with a move like bishop b3 or even bishop c2, but he decided to trade off and then land the knight on g6, or on d6, and then after knight g6, it's white's move. White is still for choice, but not sure. I feel like Alexander maybe had more in the position.
Yes, it looks like Alexander just simplified the position. He's going to recapture back the pawn on d5 at one moment, and maybe he wants to play for some advantage because he dominates the d file. But I also feel that trading this material, it just doesn't give me, doesn't help me with attacking the black king.
So can we expect some moves? This very direct rook take on d5, assuming there's no tactics. I mean, sometimes you have to be very cautious as white, given that there's a lot of targets attacked in the center, but it looks playable.
I was actually looking now, if we take on d5, black can play knight f4, but we have knight f5 coming.
Wow, such a crazy line. Everything being attacked in the position. These are positions which just make my head hurt.
But maybe black can just recapture the rook on d5 with
yeah,
knight.
knight take d5, I don't think.
I mean, it looks very interesting, but unfortunately black has a way to get away. So maybe white cannot capture the pawn right now on d5. So maybe white will start with knight f5.
Yeah, knight f5, another resource in the position. But does this allow just rook take e5?
So my idea was that I take the rook, and maybe knight takes g7. I mean, I do want to break through there to weaken the king, because I do believe that at one moment I will recapture the pawn on d5. That should not be a problem. So if your king remains weak, maybe I can try to take advantage of it.
Certainly an interesting idea. After knight f5, perhaps black would not be inclined to capture on e5. Maybe he would have to go for a move like rook e8. And I'm sorry to say this, but we could see a potential repetition if white moved back to d6. But that would not be the most exciting finale to this game. Another idea that catches my eye, if we go to the current position, instead of knight f5, perhaps a very simple g3. Just stabilize the pawn on h4, prevent knight f4, and even maybe prepare this pawn advance, pawn f4, pawn f5, where the knight would be very restricted in the position. And sometimes when you have the active play, you do want to slow down, play a quiet move like g3 to restrict the opponent, and that will allow you to advance even further later on.
I mean, if you happen to have g3, f4, e5, you have just a perfect pawn chain, and you can just slowly push on the king side. So I really like your g3 move. I'm just worried if I have time for it. So what if black responds with f6 here? Trying to undermine the center as quickly as possible to get the knight away from the d6 square.
Yeah, f6, going against the advice of Grandmaster Ben Feingold, who says never play f6. But in this case, f6 is a very logical move. I mean, why not try and destabilize white's whole setup in the center? And I mean, I would love to take the pawn on f6, but I don't think this works tactically due to the simple rook take e1 check. And then this knight would be hanging. So I would love to make this g3 idea work somehow. Maybe f4 here?
I mean, if you go g3, probably you have to follow up with f4 idea. But then another, I mean, you're making another weakness on g3. So let's say I take on e5.
Pawn take e5. And white has kind of extended all the pawns on the king side, given this king on g1, maybe not the safest piece, but it is with purpose. It is to try and reinforce the center. And it just seems like there's a lot of tactical considerations for both sides here, and time is ticking down.
Can I just capture the pawn on e5 now with the knight?
Knight take e5, just going for simplification. And if maybe rook take e5.
Yeah, maybe there will be too many trades, and we will end up in some drawish.
Some kind of drawn
But
rook
let's
ending.
see. So I take the knight.
Rook take e5, queen take e5. Well, maybe black is coming out up a pawn in this position, being able to recapture the knight and defend the d5 pawn. But yeah, this actually doesn't seem too impressive for white. White could play this move rook d4 and probably hold on for a draw, but I'm sure Alexander would want a lot more than this.
I mean, black has 2 pawns here.
Oh, 2 pawns. Yeah, I can't count accurately. Yeah, this would be great winning chances for black.
So we all think, I mean, we both thought that this is a great position for white, but maybe white has suddenly problems with the pawn hanging on e5.
And that's a risk that white has taken, sacrificing the pawn and then getting this visually appealing structure with the pawn on e5 and knight on d6. But we can see, just based on a few lines, that the structure could fall apart. So it is a risky position for white. Alexander is still thinking. I think we'll have to certainly come back to this game very soon.
So we'll get back, but before that, maybe tournament B. I thought there was an interesting game between Robert Agasaryan and Vladimir Belos.
Yeah, let's get to that game.
Another strong knight in the center.
Wow, there's another potential for this move, knight d6. This is the third game that we're seeing the possible idea. But Black's knights are relatively impressive too. I am curious how the players got to the structure, because earlier I just saw like a relatively quiet middle game, somewhat Marazzi bind structure where White had a good kind of space advantage, central control in the center. Going forward here, let's see how the position opened up. Both sides maybe dancing around with the knights. Queen f6 played, knight e2, rook d8, and then Robert is the first to strike with this move, f4, kicking away the knight from e5, and after knight g4, rook f3. Seems a bit awkward for Black, given this knight on g4, perhaps a bit misplaced, also looming ideas of h3. But okay, I guess Vladimir wasn't too uncomfortable, just played the simple move queen e7, giving the knight a retreating square on f6. After knight g3, I think this is maybe the turning point in the nature of the game. Very explosive move, pawn b5. Kind of coming out of nowhere, given that White has 3 attackers on b5 and Black only has 1 defender.
Yes, and Black needs to keep in mind that White wants to expand the position. So let's say Black is not going to play b5, take move back and play something normal, let's say knight f6 just to get the knight back. White may proceed with b4 and really kicking the knight away and having amazing position. I mean, the pawns are perfect, the knight has to go back, and I think it's very pleasant for White.
I mean, yeah, this is usually what White aims for in these sorts of structures, just a very stable, well-defended position with the attempt to just dominate all areas of the board. You can see that in this variation. That's probably why Vladimir opted for the very interesting b5 pawn advance. And after a take b5, a take b5, knight take b5, White does go up a pawn, but Vladimir strikes again with the very explosive pawn d5, and the position is just opening up drastically, and seems like White is the one under pressure.
I mean, Black is achieving what he wanted to. He has active knights, so he's opening up the position. The queen is rather in danger on d1 because we have the rook staring at it, kind of on d8. The king is weak, the diagonal on g1, a7. There may be something happening for Black. So I really like how Black is trying to crush the center and make sure to coordinate his pieces.
That's right. Going forward in what happened in the game after c take d5, e take d5, White did not take the pawn on d5, probably with good reason. I think if White goes up 2 pawns here, there would be some major concerns with, especially with this king on g1, maybe a move like knight e4, and then we can see some ideas like queen c5, maybe some potential smother mating ideas.
Yes, I mean, taking these pawns, at least White decided to play e5 to kind of block the position a little bit and make sure his king is a little safer.
I do like e5, keeping files closed and maybe allowing White's king to be a bit safer. But after knight e4, the same idea still exists in the position. Queen c5 is a very clear threat, and White has to figure out what to do here.
And we have a move. White played h3, trying to push the knight away.
h3 played, and Black immediately responded with queen b4, having no fear in the position. I wonder if maybe Vladimir was expecting h3 and calculated this out, but it seems to be getting very crazy at this point.
I must say I really like move queen b4, because now you really cannot move back the knight from b5, let's say, to d4, because there is a threat, knight c3.
Knight c3 with a simple fork, and Black would go up material in this line. So what to do for White? This knight is tied down to defending the c3 square. Does White have to go for the trade and take on g4?
So if White takes the knight, Black takes the knight.
It's a very expected line. And I mean, White is up a pawn here, but the position still wide open. Black still having threats of queen c5 or queen b6. And also, not to mention this looming idea of knight c3. So white would still be under some pressure here.
So we have a position where, again, white is pawn up. White should be happy with having this extra material, but white is also facing some difficulties, having weaker king, having maybe less coordinated pieces. This is something that you want to do if you are black. You want to try to complicate the position and attack the king.
And especially given the time situation, I mean, Vladimir has just under 25 minutes, Robert below 2 minutes, and I do like the way Vladimir is playing. Given his situation in the tournament, he's not fighting for one of the top places, so he can take a lot of risks in this game. Seems like that's what he's doing. Robert responded with h take g4, and seems like we'll see this line play out. I think we can expect queen take b5, and there's still 11 more moves to make until move 40, so Robert is going to be under major pressure for several more moves to come.
So what if we move on to the game Tukhaev Abrahamyan against Andrei Tukhaev? Andrei is still, he was tied for the second place, so he's still a contender trying to win the tournament. So what is happening on the board?
Right, and Andrei is playing the lowest seed in Group B, so I'm sure he's looking for blood in this game, and he's playing very ambitiously. He played a somewhat imbalanced Sicilian opening, but I do want to focus on the current position. Black is lunging the king forward, and what appears to be a very interesting and unbalanced endgame. I should note, usually in the endgame, you want to use your king as an active piece, given that there's not as many checkmating ideas. In this case, Andrei is using that idea to its full extent.
And the knight on a5, it's kind of, it seems it's out of the out of the main situation of what's happening in the board. So black has an easy plan. He just wants to take the pawn on h2 and just push the pawns. And white maybe a little too slow with doing the same on the queen side.
Yeah, this position, it's all about time, and it's going to come down to a pawn race, given that black has a kingside majority, white has a queenside majority, but black's plan just seems to be much faster, and I'm not too impressed with white's last move, knight to b7. What is this knight doing, and what is white going to do about this pawn on h2?
I actually thought that it's a good move before you said you are not impressed, because the knight is finally moving to the center of the board. I mean, I said the knight is kind of off, off the center. It doesn't do anything. Now I'm bringing the knight to d6 to attack some of the black pawns, but also I'm making a space for a pawn to maybe run for a queen as well.
That's actually a good point. So maybe knight b7 is a multi-purpose move. And I am realizing in this position there is a tactical idea for white where I don't think black can grab the h2 pawn right away because of the direct rook take f3. And white would actually be going up material in this position after king take f3, rook take h2. So maybe black has to figure out some other way to make progress and also figure out how to capture the h2 pawn safely.
So maybe black can do something like g4, just to push the pawn and figure out a little later how to recapture a pawn on h2.
Yeah, maybe we can play this out. Positions with pawn races are always fun to play out and not always easy to calculate. But a move like g4, what if white just starts pushing a4? What's the next idea for black? The tactical idea with rook take f3 still exists. And meanwhile, white just wants to run down the board.
So let me think. So I would like to get rid of the rook on g2, which is very difficult. So what else can I do? So let's say I play b4.
B4, hitting the rook with tempo, maybe slowing white down.
And now you
probably have to move to d3, right?
But then you are maybe getting into a fork with knight e1.
Ah, knight e1, very true, forking the two rooks. So maybe the white rook doesn't have a safe place to go in this position. Maybe rook c7?
You are actually still kind of safe after the fork knight e1, because, so let's say rook d3, knight e1, you have rook d1 move, but I still feel that trading the rooks may be for advantage for black.
Right, if knight takes g2, rook take f1, the king can come closer into the position, h2 pawn is hanging. But I don't know, this still seems a bit unclear, given white's a pawn, nothing much in its way, and white also could win f7 pawn in many lines.
So you want to play this or rook c7 instead?
Good question. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, it seems like white has a few different options, but rook d3 going into that line doesn't seem too bad for white, given this resource with rook d1.
So let's say, what if I don't play g4? I can start with b4 immediately.
You just want to play b4, chase away the rook. I do like b4 because in this case, you're maybe discouraging the a-pawn to advance given the possibilities of en passant. And we could take a look at a similar line if rook to d3, knight e1, rook to d1. Maybe it's still okay for white, given that if white does go into this line, f7 is still hanging in the end.
We have to keep in mind that Tukhaev has only 3 minutes to figure out this position. That's always difficult to calculate, to make sure it's safe for me while I'm having only 3 minutes to do so.
That's a good point, and I hate being in complicated situations, having low time, because then you can't rely on calculation. You have to rely purely on intuition, and while intuition can do you well in many cases, some cases just require you to calculate many moves ahead.
And this is usually the situation when you can regret spending so much time maybe in some previous decisions that were not as important. I remember reading an article with a British grandmaster. What's his name? I just forgot.
Not Nigel Short.
No, Michael Adams, and he was saying that that we always have to keep in mind when we are making decisions that there will be more important decisions to come. So we have to keep our time for the more important later decisions.
No, that's very true. You can't spend all your time when the first important decision comes up. You have to kind of deal with your future. So
what if we move on to a different game?
Yeah, let's go back to the Camille Dragun Alejandro game. This is our key matchup for Group B, and things have gotten traded, and the position maybe seems a bit shakier for white compared to the last time we saw the position. The knights have been traded. If we go back after knight d7, queen d4, knight f6, it was actually white who went for the knight exchange, knight to e4, trade on e4, and then pawn e5. Should keep in mind, even though the e-pawn is a weak isolated pawn, it's also a pass pawn, so it might be a weapon for black later on in the game, given it is supported by the rook on e8. And after king b1, queen c3, brings us to the current position where, I don't know, I liked white earlier, but now it seems relatively imbalanced.
Exactly. I thought that we were impressed how white played, how it's controlling the board, how the pieces are active, how everything is perfect. And suddenly I feel it may be actually the white king that is in trouble. Let's say I play rook f8 and rook f1 is a threat of a checkmate. So suddenly white has to figure out what to do and how to proceed in this position. We have to keep in mind that black is a pawn up.
That is true, though actually it's equal material. It looks like black's a pawn up, but the pawns are just separated with the isolated pawn and e5. So, I mean, from a positional standpoint, I do still like white. If queens come off the board, white has everything to play for. But Alejandro is not going to trade off queens if he's not forced to. And in the meantime, yeah, white has some scary issues to face on the back rank. Black has a very simple plan. And what to do for white in this position?
The pawn on c2 tricked me. I didn't see it at all. But what to do with white here? I mean, can you try to maybe capture the pawn on a6? So let's first protect the rook with the move queen e2.
Queen e2 just seems a bit passive. Maybe it's playable. I should note that black has another idea in the position. Just move the a-pawn down the board, try and get it to a3, create some checkmating possibilities on b2. So perhaps a5 could be played?
To give up another pawn on b5?
It is a pawn sacrifice, but...
So I will take it.
You take the pawn. I just want to sacrifice everything. Can I play a4 here to open the a-file?
And I will take it.
You take that pawn. Now your queen's a bit out of play. Can I go for rook f8? Going for the back rank mate. Your rook on d2 tied down to the c-pawn.
So I have to play something like queen e4 to make sure I'm defending the c2 square and freeing up the rook to go back to d1.
Queen e4. And maybe my play is a bit too reckless as black, but as a commentator I can maybe have fun sacrificing some pawns. I don't know if the line is finished though. After rook f1, rook d1, rook f2, still trying to have fun as black. but maybe white would have the last bit of fun with rook d8.
Maybe you're starting with queen d5.
Or even
But I
queen
do like
c5.
your ideas. I mean, that's what black has to think about, proceeding with the pawns on the queen side and trying to threaten the king with some checkmating nets.
Yeah, so maybe black wants to execute the pawn advance a bit more slowly, perhaps defend the b5 pawn first to enable the a5 pawn to run down the board. Perhaps a move like rook c5, or even just transfer the rook over to f8 where it would have more constant pressure, and given that the e5 pawn is defended by black's queen, perhaps this would be a logical continuation.
I agree, and another idea can be that if white indeed retreats to queen e2, maybe black can push the pawn. So what if black plays just e4?
At e4 in this position, I mean, yeah, there's a saying in chess, passed pawns must be pushed. In this case, especially a passed pawn defended by the rook, why not push it? Which goes to show that white might need to blockade this pawn on the e-file, given that it's a constant worry in the position. If the pawn were to get to e3, it could be somewhat of a headache for white.
And we do have to know that we have a result in Group B. We see kings in the middle of the center, players are out. Sam Sevian drew against Varakobyan.
Sam Sevian. So that was Group A, actually, and that was a key matchup for the standings in Group A. Seems like neither player really got anything. If we take a look at the final position, seems very dry. Not completely symmetrical pawn structure, but really nothing for either side to play for.
And since we are in Group A now, let's look at the game Yaroslav Zherebukh against Vasif Durabaily, the leader of Group A.
Yeah, if Vasif wins his game, he'll be much closer to taking home first place. And if we take a look at the current position, Vasif is currently up a pawn. Going back, how did he win a pawn? Looks like the pawn on d4 just was captured. We were looking at this position earlier, and we mentioned this idea with queen to b8, but I don't think we saw this simple capture on d4.
So why white can recapture the rook? What is happening there?
So I think the idea after knight take d4, queen take f2, forcing king h1, and perhaps a simple queen take d4, black is technically down material here, but I mean, look at the problems for white. The bishop on d2 attacked. Also possibilities of knight f2. I do want to show the full line just for the maybe lesser experienced viewers who are watching. If the bishop were to move in this position, let's say bishop to f4, black has a classic smother mating idea after knight f2, king g1, knight h3, king h1, and then the very aesthetic queen g1, rook take g1, knight take f2, checkmate. Every professional chess player has learned this from probably very early on in their chess careers.
So rook d4, very interesting move. I mean, we know Vasif, he's a very active player, and we see the game just finished.
Wait a minute, Vasif lost. What happened? He was up a pawn, but we didn't get to the current position. This is Vasif's first loss of the tournament. After rook d4, bishop h6 was played, going for the mating attack, not allowing black to have initiative. Knight take h6, knight take d4. So white just went up material here.
So do you think that maybe black missed the very strong move bishop h6, where it distracts the black knight and then simply just recaptures the rook?
It's a very nice resource in the position, bishop h6. Probably we all missed except Yaro, who found it. And the power of bishop h6, it does deflect the knight. So after knight take on d4, white can safely win the exchange without having to worry about the f2 pawn. And wow, I mean, going forward here, white has just upped the exchange, and Yaro converted with no trouble. Final position ended with rook a8, and it looks like unstoppable threat against this bishop on f8.
So we have many results in the Group A, so maybe we will soon get graphics and see what are the standings. But before that, let's look at the game Benjamin Bog and Peter Prohaska.
Yeah, let me find that game. Peter Prohaska
We had the rook endgame
Bach.
saying how Benjamin is maybe happier for having some control of the c-file. So how is the position looking now?
Yeah, pawns certainly got traded, and if we take a look at the current position, white did manage to win this pawn on c6, but black won the, or black seems to be about to win the pawn on a2. So, I mean, any thoughts about this position? I probably still have to prefer white, given that white is currently up 2 pawns in the position.
So we can expect rook takes a2. I mean, we see black still thinking about his game, about his move, but I don't feel like you have a better move than recapturing the pawn.
Yeah, I mean, you have to win pawns back at some point. But now it's white's move, and white can perhaps exert some pressure on black. Having the extra pawn in the position, especially this extra pawn in f4, makes the king side a bit safer. Perhaps some idea like rook c7 with the intention of queen to f5 seems very pleasant for white.
This is the kind of position where white will play for results for maybe two more hours, just moving around with the pieces, maybe trying to play something like f5, f6 to break in on the king side, but really just moving around and seeing and maybe waiting for black's mistakes. I think this is the kind of very pleasant position that you can have if you are white.
That's actually a really good point. I do like this this plan of lunging the f pawn forward, and maybe it can even be played in this position, pawn f5, going for the simple advanced pawn f6, and this is what you want to do when you have the extra pawn. You want to make full use of the extra pawn, and if white can get the pawn to f6, it may be very weakening to black's king side.
So we will wait how what white decides here, and let's look at the standings for Group A.
Yeah, we have a few results still done, a couple games still pending, but after the loss today, Vasif Darbeli is now tied for first place with Varujan Akobian, and Varujan Akobian drew his game today, so both players will be going into tomorrow's round tied for first. And Sam Sevian right behind with 5 points, so the tournament is going to come down to round 9.
And tomorrow we will have super important games, Varakobian against Daniel Friedman and Vasif Darbeli against Sam Sevian, and we will see if there will be a playoff or not.
That's true. I know we're all looking forward to what will hopefully be a very exciting playoff in the final day. Well, let's move on. Let's take a look at the games which are still going. Scrolling through here, the Jeffrey Zhang game is still going on against Alexander Indjic. A lot of material has come off the board. Let's go back and see how the knights got traded, because we were a bit perplexed with this position earlier. White's knight on d6 did not survive the next several moves. After h6, queen g3, and then we see this simplification tactic with rook take e5, and material is coming off the board. But Alexander did save his knight on from d6, going to f5, creating some threats against the king side. I think Ben Feingold loves to say knife f5, as a knight on f5 can be a very dangerous attacking piece. But Jeffrey had no worries here after queen f6. Everything, for the most part, is defended. And after knight take h6, things simplified a bit. The knights did get traded, and rook c1 played. I'm counting material here. Black is up a pawn, but, I mean, white can simply take the pawn on d5. I can see that was just played. Moves are coming pretty quickly here.
And black recaptured the rook, white captured the rook, and probably black will take the pawn on h4, which just happened. So Jeffrey is having a safe, healthy pawn up, but we have a queen endgame, and pawn up may not be enough for win, but either way, black is having a very pleasant position.
That's true, and I do want to go to the this game between Dinara Saduakasova and Sergei Matsenko. Things seem to be heating up a ton. I mean, look at this position, rook to c1. White has a huge mating attack, queen h6 looming. What to do for black in this position? We can imagine if something like rook take a3 is played, it's just going to be a mating attack for white. Rook c8, knight e8, rook take e8. This is very, very bad for black. So what to do after rook c1? Maybe the trade of rooks after rook takes c1, queen takes e1, but queen c8 is still looming, queen h7 is looming. White has two different ways to checkmate the king via the back rank or via the h7 pawn. So can't be happy in Sergei Matsenko's position here. And I mean, he is towards the top of the leaderboard in Group B, so there is some worry for him if he does go down in this game. He's not going to be fighting for the top spots in the final round. And look at his time advantage. I mean, less than 2 minutes on the clock. So I feel like this is going to be very decisive in Dinara's favor. But I do want to move on. We do have a special guest in the studio. Welcome, Yaroslav Zherebukh, after defeating Vasif Darbeli, giving him the first loss of the tournament. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So I do want to ask you about this game in terms of opening preparation. I'm sure you've played Vasif many times before, given you guys have played collegiate chess, and both in the Pro Chess League against rival teams.
Yeah.
So is this an opening that you were expecting before the game?
Yeah, because he played Grunfeld the whole tournament. He was very successful at it. So, yeah, of course I was expecting it, but move 7, a5 is already like out of the book. So, I mean, not a very deep prep by me. I actually, to be honest, I haven't prepped for any of my games here. I just, for this game, I just like, oh, Grunfeld, I'll play c3, okay, whatever, that's fine, you know. So, I mean, yeah, so you can definitely tell I wasn't prepping
Can you explain that approach? Because at a high-level tournament like this, you expect the players to be preparing very hard for every game. Does maybe not preparing for the games give you some more energy going into them?
Well, yeah, I mean, well, one of the reasons why I haven't prepped like a lot for my games, because I have a lot of other stuff going on, and I feel like if I prep for the game, I'll be just like completely exhausted, and plus I have some chess lessons in the evenings, you know, and I'm like, no, that is like way too much chess. So, and plus I've been prepping something for the US Championship, so you know I still kind of remember it, so it's useful. I mean.
Yeah, that's not a bad approach, just to save energy and
get away
maybe
with
be fresh for the game.
Yeah.
Let's go forward here, because Vasif's play was a bit unusual, especially this this rook maneuver, rook a6 and rook b6.
Well, you know, I couldn't guess any of his moves. Probably he couldn't guess any of my moves. So, I mean, I'm not particularly proud of the quality of the game, to be honest. It's just like we played, you know, like roulette. You know, he bet on red and I bet on black, and you know, it's like coin toss pretty much.
I understand.
I mean, I guess I should have been better, but then he found this queen e2 move, like after all of these complications, and I think just about equal balanced position. I think I played all right up until some point, but queen c7, I've noticed there was a blunder. Yeah, you can't play a single game without a blunder. So. Yeah, instead of queen c7, knight e5 was a normal move, and then, but I wasn't sure. I probably can't win this, because like in the line knight e5, de, rook a4, bishop a4, bishop b7. He has queen b5, I believe. That's what I calculated. So I kind of rejected this. And like if queen c8, I calculated further. Queen c8. I'm not sure if it's all fine, but. Queen e5, bishop h6, and now queen e8. And he just holds everything together. Well, bishop e8 is also fine, actually. It doesn't really matter, but queen e8 is the most precise, probably. And just draw. So I decided to take some risk. And then after queen c7, I noticed he probably can play knight e3. Knight e3, and if queen d7, then knight d1. I guess then I'm just busted.
Oh wow, because you don't have any way to defend the f2 pawn.
But I'm not sure how am I busted after rook e1. So I mean, instead of queen d7,
rook to e1, counterattacking.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but Tony Rich showed me that somehow it was like completely lost for white.
Oh really?
I'm not quite sure how, but you know, I tend to trust computers in such positions.
Of course, the engine just spits out an evaluation.
When everything's hanging, yeah.
Right.
If it's not a positional stuff, then yeah, yeah. Somehow I'm busted here. I don't know how, but rook e1, maybe knight e3, rook e1. Yeah, and here I was pretty happy after he basically that's what I calculated. Rook e1, queen b5, bishop d2. And then I think I have like say some sort of psychological initiative. His pieces are all discoordinated. My king is very safe, you know, and maybe it's not so easy for him to adjust to a new reality. Is that now I'm the one who's pushing for the initiative, you know, because previously he was attacking me and all looked very nice for him, but...
Oh, it's very hard when momentum shifts during a game.
Sure.
You go from being better to being worse. Sometimes that can lead to more blunders.
Yeah, and here I think he just collapsed somehow. Maybe because of the time trouble, but he blundered quite a lot. Well...
Was rook take d4 just a simple blunder?
I think so. I mean, well, but I already was happy about my position after queen b8. Because, you know, I didn't really see how he can defend here. If rook c8, then queen b7, bishop c6, and I thought queen b1 is interesting, but I thought maybe queen b3, and bishop d5, and then just queen d1. Bishop d5.
Bishop d5,
yeah,
queen d1.
Queen d1.
And
maybe
just be holding on to the pawn.
Yeah, and then just h3. Oh, and another line was, instead of queen b3, queen b1, queen h5, and now h4. Probably like this last, although still looks pretty safe for me, and you know, and maybe next move is just something like knight e5 or something. You know, I think I should be better here. So I was happy about the position, but after rook d4, I think it's just outright blunder. And after bishop h6, it feels like
it just seems like white's winning material.
I should be winning, although kind of he definitely decided to speed up the process. I mean, knight f3, bishop c6, and he probably just blundered rook a1 and rook a8 idea. So, but this is technically, without light square bishop, this is like even no chance for black really. No light square bishops, you can't hold this. Like even rook knight versus rook, I mean dark square bishop and the knight, it's like completely lost. So
that's right. It just seems pretty hopeless for black.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's good that I finished the game before 6 because I have a class at 6.
So wow! So you're teaching this tournament?
No,
then?
no. I have a
college class.
Yeah, university class because today is the first day of my summer semester. So.
Oh well, best of luck for the summer semester.
Yeah, my final one.
So how is it balancing school and academics? I know you're playing for the St. Louis University chess team. Is it difficult to balance two very different disciplines at the same time?
Not really, because I just take it easy, you know. I mean, when I have time, I do school. When I don't have time, I play chess.
Fair enough.
So, yeah.
Well, it sounds like you're a very busy person. Won't keep you any longer. Best of luck in the final round.
Yep, thank you.
And we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with more coverage of the 2018 Summer Chess Classic.
A moment comes in chess when you need to test yourself at a different level. Chess24 Premium offers the tools that you need to reach your maximum potential. From hundreds of interactive video lessons to becoming part of the Chess24 community. You can analyze with friends or coach your students live. You get 24/7 coverage of chess news and events, access to premium analysis and commentary, and the chance to interact with grandmasters and other top players and coaches. Get advice from the best and even challenge them to a battle. Be the best chess player you can be. It's time to level up your game with Chess24 Premium membership.
This August, the best chess players in the world are coming to St. Louis for the Grand Chess Tour. The St. Louis Rapid and Blitz and Sinkfield Cup tournaments will feature the world's best right here in St. Louis. St. Louis Chess Club is celebrating its 10th anniversary, and these tournaments will be a highlight you won't want to miss. For tickets and more information, go to stlouischessclub.org.
Welcome back, everyone, to this 2018 Summer Chess Classic. I'm International Master Eric Rosen, joined by Women's Grandmaster Katerina Nemcova. Welcome back, Katerina.
Thank you. So maybe let's look at the games in the Group A.
Yeah, we have some fights still going on and some interesting endgames which could lead to some very, very long fights. Let's start with a game between Benjamin Bach and Peter Prohaska, where we saw Peter had a nice positional game earlier, better structure. The position has liquidated a bunch into, well, now we have a 4-on-3 rook ending, where I know Peter had this a similar type of situation the other day against Ramirez. He did not manage to win. What do you think the odds are of White converting this position?
I know that the rule is if, let's say, the pawn on f4 is on e4, then Black really has to push immediately h5 to try to prevent White from expanding and wanting to force some trades. And now when I see the pawn is on f4, I feel this should be drawish. White should not be able to create a pawn that is dangerous for Black. My prediction is that this is going to be draw.
I think this is just probably going to be a dead draw. They're on move 39, so after one more move, each side will get half hour more. As White, you probably have to push, given that you do have the extra pawn and there are chances for the opponent to go wrong. But in this sort of situation, it's very difficult for White to even create a passed pawn, especially with these double F pawns.
So let's maybe move on to the Alexander Indjic and Jeffrey Zhang game, because there is also a pawn up, but instead of rooks we have queens, and that brings more chances for Black to maybe win this game.
Oh, this is an endgame which I'm sure the players have studied in the past. A very common scenario where it's just a queen ending with a pawn majority on one side. The plan is very simple for Jeffrey, just keep advancing the queenside pawns, probably eventually go for this b3 push, create the passed pawn. The only worry for Black is the safety of the king, and White's best drawing chance is some opportunity with perpetual check.
But as we see now, White cannot make any checks because we have a very active queen on c4, and the king looks actually safe for now on h7. So I expect a very, very long game. We have to know that players just made move 40, so they are getting extra 30 minutes. Long game ahead. Yeah,
and we should point out Alexander Indjic's time does say 0-0-0. I don't think he's flagged, given how the players are very focused on the position. I'm sure 30 minutes will be added to his clock very shortly. But I do like this idea for Black with the queen on c4. A lot of these squares are under control. The king on h7 seems very safe. I mean, if Black needs to, he can play g6. And meanwhile, the queen on c4 also defends this f7 pawn. So I don't know if it's going to be a quick fight. I think Jeffrey might take this one home if White can't stir up any immediate counterplay.
I remember when I was studying in Texas, Brownsville, we were playing out these positions where one side has only one extra pawn, it's a queen endgame, and I remember it was always very difficult for the weak side to really always find the best moves to keep the chance alive, to keep the drawish lines possible. So I feel even if at some moment maybe we have a drawish position where White can hold, it's very difficult to keep doing the good moves and keep the draw.
Oh, that's true. So we'll have to keep an eye on this game, see if Jeffrey can actually convert his advantage. I do want to go to a game that's actually finished in Group B, but had a really nice finale, the game between Dinara Sadiukasova and Sergei Matsenko. Dinara played some incredible attacking chess, and the final position is a bit funny, featuring a queen sacrifice. I was taking a look at this position before the interview with Yaro, and rook c1 was played, and it seemed like Sergei was very desperate with the black pieces. He went for this pawn advance, pawn g5, attacking the queen on f4, and Dinara very calmly just captured the rook on c3 with the idea that if White goes down a queen, not so fast, rook c8 would come, and this is just completely winning for White.
Very nice active game. I wonder if Dinara is playing for the GM title, because if she wins in the last round, I believe she has some chances to claim a norm.
No, she's playing very great fighting chess this tournament, And yeah, it's one thing we haven't talked about much, the norm possibilities for the players. Yesterday, I was wondering if Tatev Abrahamyan was in contention for an IM norm, and I talked to Tatev after the round yesterday, and she informed me that she has maybe a dozen IM norms, and she's just needing that the 2400 FIDE rating.
So now Dinara maybe for the GM title going, but let's look at another game. I thought Kamil Dragun, Alejandro Ramirez, we have another rook endgame. Is that a draw, or who is playing for advantage?
Yeah, we were seeing this position earlier with queens on the board, and with queens on the board, Black had some active play, maybe some attacking ideas, but queens are now traded, and I think White has everything to play for, especially with this rook on e7. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if White just puts both rooks on the 7th rank. This is a very fundamental endgame concept. You want your rooks as active as possible. In this case, I like to call it 7 heaven, where the rooks are just in heaven, just dominating Black's territory.
And maybe for less experienced players, we can show an interesting line. So let's say White goes for this strong move, rook d7, to dominate on the 7th rank, and Black wants to defend the pawn on g7 and play rook g6. Now White has a very strong move, rook d8 or rook e8, checkmating actually the king.
Yeah, that's the nature of the rooks on the 7th. Not only do they threaten to win pawns, but there's all these threats of back rank mate. So maybe Black would have to play the counter-attacking move, rook to f1, forcing king b2, and then rook f2, trying to get some 7 heaven of himself. Or in this case, 2nd heaven, I should say.
And if White goes for the trade, so let's play it out.
So rook take g7,
king f8.
King f8, and there's no check on f7. Meanwhile, Black is just guaranteed to win the c-pawn. So maybe not so simple for White.
So let's say White takes on h7. Now we have to be worried about the back rank checkmate. Either rook h8 or rook d8 is a threat for a checkmate. But Black has some counter-attacking chances. So let's say rook c takes c2.
But can the king just run away? King a3? Rook take a2, king b4. I think White would be escaping here, and Black would be in big trouble.
So I would really like to play after king a3 2 moves to make a5 first, to trap you there and then make a checkmate. Unfortunately, that would not be possible. But I can wait with capturing on a2, and maybe I can move my king to g8 or e8 to just make sure I'm not getting checkmated.
Yeah, that's maybe the last chance for Black, but a move like king e8 could walk into the very simple rook a7, and with the rooks so far separated, rook a8 or rook h8 are threats. I don't see Black surviving this position.
So let's play king g8. I feel that is a more natural move where we are still attacking the rook and making sure that we cannot get checkmated immediately.
So let me actually just show some instructive ideas here. I actually gave a video for the St. Louis Chess Club a few months back. It's called Pigs on the 7th Rank, the rooks being compared to pigs in this case, showing a lot of different checkmating ideas in these sort of scenarios. White would have the very forcing rook g7 check, king f8, and then rook a7 going for these same ideas. And if king g8, White could just very simply move the rook across the board, going as far away as possible from the Black king and trying to create some attack on the back rank.
We see this advantage of being first on the 7th or 2nd rank because you are the one who has extra tempo and can create more mating threats. So Black has some issues to deal with. Luckily, Black has 30 minutes and he can calculate what is the biggest chance for him to hold on to a draw.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the current position, Kamil is taking his time. I'm curious if he's considering a different move than rook d7, maybe first delivering the check on d8 and then playing rook d7. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see some similar lines play out.
So we can move on to the game Tatev Abrahamyan, Andrei Tukhaev. We saw some knight and rook endgames there.
This seems like a just crazy tactical battle. Not to mention, it's deep in the endgame. We saw the pawn race scenario earlier. White's pawn has reached all the way to a7, but now it's being blockaded by the rook on a8. And Black is up a pawn here. Not saying the pawn count is too relevant, but these 3 connected passed pawns, and everything well defended for black. I like Andrei's chances to win this game.
I must say that I do like the knight on d3, defending the f2 and f4 squares and kind of blocking the king to maybe come closer to the pawn on g3. But now the pawn on a7, pardon me, is attacked. So what white can do? Can white go maybe for knight c5?
Yeah, knight c5, definitely a move in the position. Then it's a question, where does black's king move? King is tied down to defending the rook, so I believe black would be forced to play a move like king f4.
So knight c5, king f4.
And white still has to worry about this pawn on a7 simply being attacked and not defended. And meanwhile, it just seems like white's pieces aren't coordinated. Like the knight on c5, it is towards the center, but it's not doing much to benefit white in the position.
So let's say I go with another check, knight d3. I mean, it is a difficult situation. It seems that black does not have that many troubles because the pawn on a7 is very advanced, but it's not supported and doesn't have enough pieces to try to force it to go to the 8th rank.
Yeah, after knight d3, I would probably go for king f5, making sure the knight can't check the king in at least immediately. And I think it's white having a lot of issues to deal with.
I agree. This is a very difficult situation for white and looks like a pleasant one for black.
And I do want to move on to a game that's finished in Group B. Robert Agassarian drawing Vladimir Belis in what seemed to be a hard-fought game. The final position we were discussing from the other game, the rooks on the 7th coming to life. If we see how the game ended after rook take b3, rook f take f7, it seems like white has advantage here, but maybe there was nothing to play for. After rook g3, white gave some checks, and I think white saw nothing more than a draw. We do have to note black is threatening some counterplay with a move like rook b2.
And also the pawn on g4 is hanging, so even if white gets back to defend the g2, black can simply recapture the pawn on g4, and this is a draw.
So definitely some hard-fought games today, and some games with overlapping themes. We saw this theme earlier with the knight landing on d6, some themes of rooks coming to the 7th or 2nd rank in the endgame. Which game to move on to?
I would like to see what's happening in the game Alexander Indjic and Jeffrey Zhang. How is Jeffrey playing for a win with extra pawn, queen endgame?
Yeah, seems like Jeffrey has made some progress. If we go earlier, the pawns are just racing down the queen side every move after pawn a3, pawn b5, and Indjic is just kind of forced to be passive here, just kind of wait around. Not the most enjoyable plan for such positions, just to do nothing and let your opponent continually make progress.
And we also can know that there are tricks like queen b3 for black to play now, and white is unable to exchange the queens because the pawn is simply promoting for another queen.
Yeah, queen b3, of course white can't trade on b3. Maybe white could use some geometry here with the open position, go for queen h5, attack the king after king g8, defend from a more active square on c5. And it's still a question how black is breaking through and also managing to have some safety for the king on g8.
And white has some perpetual check chances here with queen c8 and queen h3 to maybe keep attacking the king and forcing a draw. So black has to be careful about not maybe giving up too many files and moving away the queen and making sure that I'm advancing slowly.
Yeah, just to demonstrate that line, like if black were to go for the immediate breakthrough here with a move like b4, we can even see white can take the pawn, and after a3, queen c8 check. Not entirely sure if black can escape these series of checks after queen h3. The king would have to run in front of the pawns, and it seems a bit difficult for black in this position to actually escape the checks.
So let's try to predict the move that Jeffrey is going to make. If queen b3 is not that great, what else can we do if we are black? We can do something like g6 to make sure we are defending the h5 square.
I do like g6. I mean, why not? There's no hurry in this position. Black has all the time in the world to make progress. Why not play an improving move, stop queen h5, And always have to keep this in mind, f7 is defended, so white really doesn't have much of a target to attack in this position.
Another idea can be queen e4. Just trying to improve the queen, put it more in the center, and see how white is going to react to this check.
Yeah, it's another strategy in these positions, just play a move which makes your opponent think. And I know I've mentioned this before, but if you can continually force your opponent to make decisions, you can get them low enough on time where maybe you can provoke some blunder later on.
Yeah, sometimes I'm analyzing positions like this with my students and they are saying, how do I win such a position? And I'm like, just make a move and see what your opponent is going to do. Sometimes you don't have a direct plan. Sometimes you just want to improve your position and maybe give a chance for your opponent to make a blunder or make a mistake or show you how you can go and improve your position.
That's true. I do want to take a look at the matchup so far in Group A. We do have many results taking place. I believe only 2 games still pending, with Alexander Indjic playing Jeffrey Zhang, and the only other game, Peter Prohaska against Benjamin Bach. Maybe we can switch gears and take a look at the Benjamin Bach game, given that many moves have been played, but I don't see much progress being made for white in this position.
When we discussed this position, we thought it's going to finish in a draw soon. I think that's still the case. I think they are going to agree on a draw.
And let me ask you a fun question here. I know I've asked you this question about previous positions earlier in this tournament, but let's imagine you have the black pieces against Magnus Carlsen. How confident are you that you could draw against the one and only Magnus?
I think saying that you're going to draw a position against Magnus, that's so bold. I don't know that I would do it in a same color bishop endgame that maybe drawish, because sometimes you are just worried that these players can think about magic that you don't see. So I don't know how confident I would be, but I do think this should be a draw. I
think it would take actual magic to win this position as white, given, I mean, what's the breakthrough? I think the only idea to consider is something like h3, g4, but black has everything under control.
Well, I think white can try to go maybe rook a2, rook a6, to see what you're going to do about your king, and then slowly but surely move the pawns up.
Yeah, but even if black just waits on a square like g7, I mean, I think it's just a waiting game for black. And when the pawns advance, there will be trades, and there shouldn't be too much life for white in this position.
And we have some moves in the game, Alexander, in the Jeffrey Zhang game. g6 indeed happened, and Alexander chose g4 move, which I thought is rather surprising. I like the idea of putting the pawn on g5 and maybe having some control of the squares around the king so we can go for perpetual check. But it seems so weakening.
I mean, this is actually a very typical idea in these sort of queen-pawn endgames where one side is up the pawn. White actually shouldn't care too much about the safety of the king. All white cares about is exposing the black king. So if white can lunge the pawns forward, try and maybe initiate some trade, maybe we'll see some idea like king g3, f4, f5. It's all about exposing the black king and creating some drawing chances with some eventual perpetual check.
So I'm curious how this game gonna unfold, but if I was black, I would play something like queen f4 and just waiting to see what is your next move, because you do have to make sure you are not gonna lose the pawn on g4, and my simple idea is to break through on the queen side when I can, just to play b4.
Mm-hmm. I mean, still lots to play for in this game. I do want to go to another game in Group B with Camille Dragun against Alejandro Ramirez, because I'm being told that Camille could possibly clinch victory today if he's able to win the game. Not sure if we have a graphic for the results so far in Group B, but I mean, it seems like things are going Camille's way. There's only 2 games pending so far, with Camille having the advantage against Alejandro Ramirez. Dinara Saduakasova defeating Andrei Matsenko, and that eliminates Andrei from actually, it's not Andrei Matsenko, it's Sergei Matsenko, eliminates him from coming back to try and clinch victory. And with the draws between Josh Friedel, JJ Alimirandi, and Robert Agasarian, Vladimir Ballas, I'm pretty sure Camille can clinch first place with a win. We should take a look at the standings. We can see a pretty big gap between Camille and the rest of the field. Yeah, if Camille wins, his game's still pending. He would get 6 points. I guess that just leaves Tukhaev, who could catch up. If Tukhaev wins today, he would have 5 points going into tomorrow. So there's some speculation here. If Andre and Camille win, they'll be the two players fighting for first place in the final game tomorrow.
But we have to know that it's very interesting. Dinara Saduakasova, she is tied for the second place so far. She started as rank 9 in this tournament, so she's doing very well here. We talked about maybe her chances for getting a GM norm, but definitely a very nice tournament for her.
Yeah, very impressive play by Dinara so far, and a lot of her games have been so instructive, like very direct attacking chess. Her win against Alejandro Ramirez, sure Alejandro not pleased with me bringing this up, but it was a pretty stellar victory. And her game today against Sergei Matsenko, I mean, just very impressive play.
So let's look back at the game Tukhaev Abrahamyan against Andrei Tukhaev. We had some chances. We thought black has some advantage there. So how it's now? We don't see too many moves being played.
Yeah, well, both players got the extra time after move 40. It's currently move 43. Rook a4 just played by Tukhaev. It's Andrei's move, and I mean, I have to favor Andre in this position. Even though this pawn on a7 is a bit annoying, I feel like black's massive passed pawns on the king side should be even more annoying. It's just a question, how does black actually make progress in this position?
And I think that's a very important question, because visual opposition can be appealing, but then we need to see how we actually can advance that advantage and maybe change it to a win. Because I see a plan for white. White can try to play knight d7 and knight b6 to force the rook from a8 to get away and then promote our pawn. So black has to try something similar. Maybe black has idea with knight e3, then g2 and rook f1.
It's very true, and it's black's move, which should give some advantage to black, meaning time is very, very important in this sort of situation. Knight to e3 looks incredibly logical, hitting the rook on g2, forcing it to move away, and allowing the g-pawn to advance. Maybe we can play this out and see how the game could transpire. Let's say rook g1. Assume you just want to play g2, right?
I was thinking actually, if we just go back with rook g1, if I can play rook a3.
Rook a3. In this position after knight e3.
There is,
wow.
I want to pin the knight, but there is a very strong move, knight c4, where just game
knight
pretty
c4
much
check,
over.
yeah, simple tactics, right?
So we see, I mean, this is an endgame, but we still have to be careful about some tactical tricks, because the black pieces are active, the white king is exposed, and the knight is a very tricky piece to be attacking with.
Yeah, so if knight e3 is played, rook a3 out of the question. I do want to see what's happening in this line. After rook g1, let's say pawn g2. It seems like black is a bit quicker here.
So I do have to play a move like rook a1.
Rook a1. Yeah, the rook on a1 actually very multi-purpose, supporting the pawn, perhaps discouraging rook f1. And it's still a question, how is black making further progress in the position? Ooh, maybe there's a nice move, knight c4 check. And where is the king going?
I thought I can go king a2, but then there is simply rook take a7 and black is winning. So white has to be very careful. So what is another move that I can do after knight e3? And I see that knight e3 happened in the game. So white is suddenly thinking what to do here. It may be just a lost position.
I really like knight e3. Not only is it supporting the g-pawn advance, there's all of these looming ideas of knight c4 check, which could be very annoying for white in the position. Meanwhile, Tukhaev's time is ticking down. Is Tukhaev at the board? I don't see Tukhaev at the board.
So I actually do have an idea here. So after rook g1.
Okay, Tukhaev is back at the board, writing down her move. Maybe she was taking a last chance coffee break before she has to stay at the board for the rest of the game. So what's your idea?
So let's play rook g1, g2, and now I will just try to go for a counter-attack. I will go with knight d7.
Knight d7. Sometimes the best defense is offense, but I'm going for offense as well. Rook f1.
So rook f1 is happening. I have to take rook takes g2.
Yeah, the pawn on the second rank sometimes more valuable than a rook. After knight takes g2, I see your idea. Knight to b6, I assume?
Yes.
We might actually see this game go on for much, much longer, where black basically has to do the same thing, if I'm not mistaken. Rook take a7, rook take a7, and the passed pawns, or the dangerous passed pawns, have come off the board, but the resulting position, black having two connected passed pawns, I think
Black is
Andre would
clearly
have a
the
huge
favorite
advantage.
here, but knights are tricky, and black would have to be still careful to transfer this pawn advantage into a full point.
Right, so definitely a game to keep our eyes on. The current position, Tatev did play rook to g1. Andre is still pondering his next move, perhaps considering the lines that we've been talking about, but maybe seeing more than us.
Maybe. So what is happening in the game of Jeffrey Zhang? I'm very curious to see how the queens are being played. But there's a pawn up.
Well, we finally have a pawn break in the Jeffrey Zhang game. We can see b4 has been played. Jeffrey walking away from the chair, a sign that maybe he's comfortable with what's going to happen over the next few moves. Black will very soon have a passed pawn on the queen side, and should also note that Jeffrey did play this g6 move, creating a lot of safety for the king on h7.
I have to say that I do like the b4 move. Immediately going for promotion with the a pawn. I think white. I really don't like the g4 move. I know that you said that it's a good move to control the squares, but I feel it's a huge weakness in the white camp.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out some path forward for white. I mean, seems like white has to take the pawn after queen take b4. Now it's a big question: can white get play against the black king before black can just score a touchdown with his a pawn? A line like queen d7 doesn't seem to be too promising, because the black queen can find a very nice square on b3. And I mean, the a pawn just marching down the board, queen on b3, supporting the a pawn and defending f7. Seems like Alexander has to go all out to create some idea, but I'm not sure if any ideas exist for white.
And another idea for black may be after b4 and pawn takes b4. Maybe black does not have to recapture the pawn. Maybe after pawn takes b4, black can just push a3.
a3, I mean, maybe a few good options for black, given that this pawn on b4 are not a nuisance in the position, and when a2 is played, white is pretty much lost. So, not a bad idea, but we'll keep an eye on that game. We should focus our attention to Group B, because first place is on the line, and I think we're going to stay with these games until we know whether or not Kamil Dragun has clinched first place in the tournament. We can see the line that we were discussing earlier is playing out with 7 heaven for white. Let's actually go back to review. Kamil did play rook d8 check first, but I don't think too much changes after rook d7, rook f1, and white is scooping up the pawns on the 7th rank. And Alejandro's move, Kamil away from the board. Alejandro can't be too happy, given that black doesn't seem to have any sort of perpetual check.
And again, white is 2 pawns up, can attack the king on the back rank. This is such a pleasant position for white, such a difficult position for Alejandro.
As black, I would like to maybe shift the a pawn up 1 square when the opponent's not looking. Of course, that would never happen. But if black's pawn was on a5, then this idea with rook takes c2 could be a lot powerful, creating this mating idea if the king ever comes to a3. Unfortunately for Alejandro, the pawn is not on a5, and now he has to figure out how to proceed in the position. I assume he's going to take the pawn on c2. It's just a question of which rook to capture with, but things do not seem too promising for him.
I thought that maybe we can start with the king g8, just to make sure we are not in checkmate immediately. And then recapture the pawn. So let's try to play it out.
Okay,
let's say king g8 happens.
So we should also keep in mind, even if white isn't mating in this position, white is up 2 pawns. So white has a few winning ideas. White could either go for mating attack or just trade off a pair of rooks and be up material. As white, I would go for the same idea: rook to g7, king f8, and then bring the rook all the way back to a7, not only going after another undefended pawn, but going for rook 8 with mate.
So I would go back again. King g8, I mean, it's kind of forced. I do have to keep the rook attacked. I do have to keep in mind the checkmate on the back rank. So here at least I have the f-file free, so the rook on f2 can get back on f8 and protect the king.
That is true. As white, I'll just continue with my plan. Rook h to b7. If I'm not mating you, at least I'm trading rooks and probably winning the pawn on a6.
So now I take the pawn. Rook c takes c2. I mean, I have to take that pawn as well, even though it may not be enough.
And actually, when you take the pawn, you're forcing the king to move up the board. A move like king b2 would result in perpetual check for black. So I would be forced to play king a3.
So I take another pawn.
You take another pawn. I run the king. Then it's actually equal material, but I feel like white is still the one to be pushing for some advantage in this position.
So let's say I now push the pawn e4. I mean, that's the only pawn that can do something. So it's not like I have too many choices here.
Yeah, pawn e4, and now I guess it's a question: what does white do in the position? Because maybe the line with trading rooks isn't entirely clear. A line like rook to b8, rook f8, rook take f8, king take f8. Black actually has everything covered. The e-pawn could be annoying. This pawn is attacked on h2. Maybe this is Alejandro's drawing chance in the position. I see he just played a move. Looks like he captured the pawn with the c-rook. So he didn't start with king g8, but it's possible the line could transpose into what we're looking at. Let's go to the current position. Camille doesn't have too many options here. I think he has to play king a3 if he wants to play for a win. Maybe just double checking these lines, just making sure he's not hallucinating. The pawn still is on a6, not on a5. King a3 is quickly played.
So black can take the pawn here as well, just to take rook takes a2, forcing the king to go to b4, and now to move away with the king, maybe king g8.
Yeah, king g8. It looks like we're going to get us a very similar position, maybe the same position with just a transposition. And can we expect, okay, moves are coming pretty rapidly. Rook a2 played, and then king to b4, and Alejandro playing king g8. So we were predicting the future in this game.
So king g8 has happened. Now players do have 20 minutes, so they are just like playing quickly because they see they think it's obvious. So king g8 happened as well. We are having the position that we just analyzed.
Right, and here, I mean, I think we can expect rook dg7, king f8, rook a7 going into the line that we were discussing. And the big question, can white play for anything more than just a draw? And king g8, rook hb7, then you wanted to play just the why not move e4. Makes sense.
I mean, it's really not too many. There are no other chances for black than e4. But I do want to stay with this game, but I saw that we have new moves in the game, Tatev Abrahamyan and Andrei Stukhopin, but moves that we did not predict.
That's right, and this is another key game for the standings in Group B. If Andrei wins his game, he'll still be in contention to catch up to Camille, no matter what happens in Camille's game. And it looks like Andrei should be closer to converting the position.
So we were looking at the g2 idea with rook f1, but Andrei decided to play rook f4 instead, to make sure that the rook on a4 is no longer active. Maybe black wants to trade it, so then the pawn on a7 can be just captured.
I am being told Jeffrey Zhang has won his game against Alexander Indjic, which we were expecting. The final position looks a little unusual. You can see neither player at the board currently. Let's just take a look at the current position. Standings are not important for this game, but going back just to show the endgame technique by Jeffrey. Let's go back further. So what happened? G4, B4. Oh, queen take A4. I don't think we actually saw this move. The A4 pawn was hanging, but after queen take G4, black is able to continually check the king, maneuver the queen to a desired location after queen d6 check. Beautiful move attacking the king and also supporting the pawn to capture on a3. this is just completely winning for black.
Very nice and important win for Jeffrey, who with this point is 5 out of 8, so he's still going for the first place in the last round.
Yeah, so should we go back to the Tatev Abrahamyan game against Andres Tukhaev, where we left off? Tatev thinking at the board there. Her time situation appears to be getting worse and worse. She's just above 10 minutes. Andre sitting at a very comfortable 26 minutes. And I do really admire this move, rook f4. I think it's just a simple tempo move. White does not want to allow the trade, which would allow black's king to activate and leave the pawn on a7 undefended. So white has to somehow avoid the trade by moving the rook, but where does the rook go?
So rook a5 would be a big blunder because we would lose it immediately with knight
Yeah,
c4.
we should point out the fork potential. These squares on a3 and a5 are off limits due to the lingering knight c4 check, which means not too many squares for the rook.
So let's say white will play rook a6. That's a safe spot. We are moving away with the rook, making sure that we are still defending the pawn on a7 and keeping the chance of moving the knight d7, knight b6, and promoting the pawn.
That's true, and it would be black's move here. I'm curious if black can just play the simple double attack, maybe rook c4, going after the c2 pawn with check, also attacking the undefended knight on c5.
But do you want to give up the pawn on g3?
So it does leave the g3 pawn hanging. This move would probably require some calculation. If rook takes g3, rook takes c2, king would have to move, rook takes c5, the knight comes off the board, but maybe this final position, rook a7, and white can't defend the pawn further?
So I just thought that maybe instead of king, this is correct. I think this is just lost for white. But maybe if we just move the king to b1 instead of b3.
So king b1. Oh, maybe a nice nuance in the position, allowing the third rank to be accessible to the rook. Sometimes when calculating these long variations, you want to pay attention to maybe the small differences between two different options. In this case, after rook takes c5, rook take e3, rook c7 could be met with rook a3. I would still think there's some advantage for black, but maybe it would be quite annoying with the pawn being very well defended.
We
on
have
a7.
to keep in mind that the rook on a8 is locked. It cannot be moved almost never, because then we will be able to promote the pawn. So
well, what do you think about this position? Can black still play for a win, given there are two connected passed pawns on the king side, or would this be holdable for white?
So let's see, black's choice is to go and advance the pawn. So it's black's turn, so let's say black plays e5. That's a logical move. Now what can white do? I like the rook on c7, kind of stopping the white king from going maybe and helping to prevent the promotion of the pawns. So if I'm white, I play rook f3. I check the king to know where you are going with the king.
I would play king e4. The problem for white, in order to defend the a pawn, you need two rooks defending at all times, right?
So I just go back.
You go back. I keep pushing, but maybe I have to be a bit accurate. Maybe king f4 here.
Now I have rook f6.
Rook f6, king g5.
And I go back.
You go back, f5. I feel like black can slowly but surely make progress, while white is kind of tied down with all the pieces.
And that's a difficult situation. So maybe I would be okay of trading the pawns. So maybe like rook e6 somewhere here.
Rook e6 in a position like this. The thing about rook e6 is that after the pawns get traded, let's say rook take a7, let's say the rooks get traded and rook take e5.
The king is still so far away. That's the element that I do not like in the white's position.
This is an endgame which I teach most of my students. This is maybe a variation of the well-known Lucena position, where it's rook and pawn versus rook, but the white king is severely cut off far away from the pawn. This would just be a technical win for
So let's go
black
back
side.
and see if there is a way for white to defend, or if it's just lost.
Yeah, maybe we can go back. Should we go back to the current position or go back to around here?
I think the 47 move.
Move 47. Yeah, around king b1.
No, maybe, okay, maybe a little more, maybe back.
So going back further, this all came from my suggestion, just to give a refresher to the viewers. We're calculating the line from the current position after, oh, you know what? A few moves have been played. Seems like Tatev allowed the rook trade. Somewhat surprising. Let's refresh the board, get to the current position, and see how the game transpired. After rook f4 was played, Tatev just took the pawn on g3.
I mean, she had very difficult situation. We saw that the rook c4 was a threat. Black has advantage there. This is another advantage for black. Maybe this is just, maybe it's winning for black and white doesn't have a good choice.
Yeah, maybe Tatev, she was calculating the lines. She thought that this doesn't look too promising, but maybe it's the best chance, so she went for it. But now we have a situation, 2 pawns for black, 1 pawn for white. You have to favor Andrei, not only with the extra material, but also with the time advantage.
We have to say that the 44th move, rook f4, was very strong of making sure that black is not going directly for his attack with some g2 and rook f1, but trading the rooks and going just for peaceful advantage in the endgame.
Yeah, very calm play by Andrei, and you have to admire the endgame technique, especially among a lot of grandmasters when they get a winning position. Sometimes they get a grip and they just hold on to it. And I think this is what we're seeing here. Andrei taking no risks, having the pawn advantage, and these 2 connected passers are going to be so much easier to advance compared to the 1 passer for white on the queen side. But you never know. Knights can be tricky, and there are some drawing chances for white. The first drawing opportunity that comes to mind, if Tatev can somehow sacrifice the knight for both of black's pawns, there are scenarios in endgame where rook and knight versus a lone rook would be a draw.
I agree, actually. I draw this endgame in a very important game during my World Youth Championship, so white has huge chances to make a draw there, but it's very stretched idea to try to take the pawns, but sometimes that's all you can do. I mean, you have already lost position and you have to keep the hope and have to try to do something in order to keep the chances for not losing the game.
That's true. We can see one more move played by Tatev, knight to c5, trying to get some activity with the knight, but now it's a matter for Andrei how to make progress on the king side, given these pawns are passed, but they're not dangerous just yet, given the f7 pawn's still on the starting square, e6 not too dangerous. It's a matter of coordinating the king, the rook, and the knight, allowing the pawns to advance freely.
And speaking about progress, what if we move on to the game of Kamil Dragun and Alejandro Ramirez and see what the progress is there?
Right. We can see many more moves have been played. White and black having 7 heaven and 2nd heaven, but the heaven being slightly more preferable from the white side. Let's go back and see what happened after king g8, rook dg7, king f8, rook a7. And now we see maybe a small wrinkle in compared to what we were looking at earlier. I was suggesting rook b7, going as far away from the king as possible. Kamil went for the perhaps more logical rook e7, just keeping an eye on the e-pawn, which is a potential weakness in the position. And now white's rooks are beautifully placed, given that, there's constant pressure against both pawns.
I do have to say that I like the rook e7 move because black's idea was to play e4, e3 and go for promotion. And now black cannot do that.
Right. Now it's one more move has been played actually after king to f8. There's been looks like it's white's move. Now the question is, can white just safely take the pawn, or maybe white is concerned about leaving the h2 pawn undefended, and sometimes the more pawns that come off the board, the more drawish it can be. But what else to do for white? It doesn't seem like there's too many options in the position. We could maybe imagine some move like rook b7 here. Given the king on f8, there is some mate threats, right, against the black king. Pretty sure this would force king g8.
Another question after king g8 is, what if white goes for the trades and white plays rook b8, forcing rook f8, captures on f8, king captures, because now the material is equal, but we clearly see that that the rook on a7 is very active, is cutting off the king on b4 is very active, and maybe white can push the pawns on the king side. But we do have to be careful about the black pawn on e5 as well, because that pawn can run too.
It's another pawn race, another major theme of today. So the two remaining games in Group B featuring some interesting pawn race scenarios. And we do have a move. It was not rook b7, Camille Dragun going for the immediate pawn h4. When you're in a race, you don't want to waste any time. You want to go as quickly as possible. And white now has some ideas not only of queening the pawn, but perhaps using the pawn as a helper to defend the rook on potential g7 square, and sometimes this could be sufficient enough to achieve checkmate against the black king.
I wonder if black can play here something like rook f3.
Rook f3, going after the g-pawn, which is currently not defended, also keeping an eye on the b-pawn. This looks fun to play out. Let's say pawn h5?
Or actually, I wanted to start with not rook f3, but starting with a5.
A5 check, so giving up the b-pawn.
And now rook f3.
Rook f3.
So you have to keep in mind that you cannot take on a5 because the rook on e7 is still hanging. And now I do want to take on b3.
So, interesting scenario here. I would be inclined as white to just keep pushing the h-pawn. But I am considering some other options here. Let's say pawn h5. How to continue?
So I capture on b3.
King c4.
Now I wonder if I want to play rook b4 or capture another pawn.
Couple options for black in this position. We can see a somewhat lack of coordination between the black rooks, and black can't waste too much time here given white is very close to queening, maybe even considering walking the king in to generate some mating ideas.
Aren't you in trouble? So what if I go rook b4?
King d5.
Now I go rook d2.
The checks keep coming. Rook d2, king e6.
Rook b6.
Rook b6. Let me find some shelter on f5.
Then I go rook f2 check.
Rook f2, king to g5. It's like a cat chasing a mouse. Like you keep going after the mouse keeps running away, and finally it runs to somewhere where there's some shelter. And it's all about finding shelter in these positions where, okay, if white can kind of be blanketed by the passed pawns on the king side, maybe there's some hope to escape the checks and win the game.
But now I'm also happy that the king is away from the queen side, so I can push my pawn. I can go a5. I can just run.
Pawn, oh, you mean pawn a4?
Oh, a4, sorry.
That doesn't scare me too much. I would just go for h6.
Oh, he played king g5. Okay, h6. I don't know why my computer doesn't... Oh, h4, h6. Yeah, this pawn is too fast.
And even like if you play rook h2, h7 coming doesn't look too promising for black.
So maybe that was too many checks. But some chances like this, trying to break through in the queen side and make the rooks work together and keep checking the king, maybe that can be an idea for black to go with.
Can we just switch gears for a moment? Let's go back to the Tatev Abrahamyan against Andrei Sukopin game. A lot of moves have been played. Tatev, again, not with the best time situation. Knights have been traded.
Can we just go back and see what happened? How
yeah, I don't think Tatev should have allowed the knight trade, but maybe she was forced to after the very simple rook c7, simply skewering the knight on c5 and the pawn on c2. And this is a problem for white because the knight does create some drawing chances in the position, but after knight's getting traded, I have a feeling it's just going to be a technical win for the black side, having the two extra pawns.
I mean, one extra pawn, but two connected pawns that are just going together and pushing the rook that's in front of it. If we have sometimes rook behind the pawns are stopped. But if the rook is in front of the pawns and the king is there to support the pawns, I think this is just a technical win.
Yeah, and even if white got a few extra tempi and does manage to, let's say, get the king to b7 and pawn to c7, there's many cases where black is just happy sacrificing the rook for the c-pawn and then being able to win the game with the king and 2 pawns against the lone rook, with white's king being too far away.
I agree. So we are spending some time in the tournament B. Let's go to the tournament A. We have the last game between Benjamin Bok and Peter Prohaska. We predicted a quick draw. They are still playing, still fighting.
Yeah, almost forgot about this game. I was falling asleep to it earlier. Look at white's pawn structure, having 2 sets of isolated double pawns. I guess it was some attempt to make progress. But okay, the game is continuing, and what could have been a quick draw is turning into a very, very long fight. From the white side, I mean, you have to be somewhat creative to keep the game going from this position.
Yes, but what is your prediction? Still a draw? Would you be okay playing this with Magnus?
I mean, I think the more pawns that get traded, the easier it is to hold the position. I mean, I'm afraid of Magnus Carlsen, but in a position like this, I think it should be pretty simple. Black is pretty much guaranteed to win the pawn on h2. Maybe we can predict some move like king f3, rook take h2, king g3. But black is just going to keep the rook on h1. And I mean, all of white's pawns are actually long-term weaknesses, given they can't be defended by each other. And meanwhile, I just don't see where white is making progress in this position.
So let's go back maybe to tournament B. We know what's happening in the Tatev Abrahamyans and Andrei Stukopin game. So maybe again see if there's a progress in Kamil Dragun's game against Alejandro Ramirez.
Yeah, that seems like the one game where it's a bit difficult to predict the result. Kamil Dragun clearly playing for the win. I do have to mention, if he wins his game and Andrei wins his game, which Andrei is expected to win, Kamil will not clinch first place after today. He'll have to at least draw tomorrow. So, but it's still very important for the standings. If he can win this game, gives him a very big lead, and probably he would like to avoid any potential playoff after round 9 tomorrow.
And just by the time how much Alejandro Ramirez is spending in this position, it's over 7 minutes right now, we can see how unpleasant it is for him and how difficult to find a position where, a line where he's happy.
Yeah, I do like the angle, the camera angle right there. We can see both players leaning forward, kind of the classic chess player pose. And I mean, Alejandro, his posture seems to be very acute in the way that he's sitting. Yeah, given the amount of time he spent on this position, there's so many lines to calculate, as we've seen, and it's not easy as the time is ticking down. It's not easy to choose maybe the most precise line. Sometimes these positions you need to take a long thing to fully understand.
So I feel like we have a clear picture about what's happening in the games. So maybe let's talk about the 2018 Grand Chess Tour. It's about to start in 1 month.
In 1 month, Paris and Leuven, right?
Yes.
I'm pretty sure the fields have been determined. The events happening in St. Louis will take place in August, starting with the St. Louis Rapid and Blitz, running from August 9th through the 16th. Last year was the first edition of the tournament, and I was here in person. It was such an incredible event, just witnessing so many super GMs, including Kasparov, playing some very high-level blitz.
And following this tournament, we have the 6th annual Sinquefield Cup, which is the very prestigious tournament. Top grandmasters are being there. Sometimes Magnus Carlsen, Fabiano Caruana, who St. Louis is his home time. But so far, we don't have a determined players who are going to play here. Right,
and we should mention, I'm just being told, we have 5 unique winners of the Sinquefield Cup. No one has repeated victory in this tournament. Will we have a 6th one? What are the odds? I mean, it's going to be an interesting event, and I think it's going to be very exciting for the spectators watching around the country, around the world, but especially the ones in St. Louis. I know every year they have an autograph session before the event where, I mean, hundreds of spectators come out, a lot of hardcore chess fans to get autographs from the top players.
And they have grandmasters here doing site analysis. Very great events. If you are able to come here, we definitely recommend it. Otherwise, make sure to watch it on grandchester.org. And I know that we have a result in Group A.
Group A result, the
Peter Prohaska and Benjamin Bog. We thought it will be a quick draw. It was a long draw, but still a draw.
Yeah, after King H6. Oh, interesting. We had the position where White had captured on H4. Maybe it was an error with the GGT board. The pawns were not traded, but still not much life in this position. I don't think we have to spend much time talking about this final game in Group A.
So soon we will look at the standings in Group A, but now let's go back to Group B, to the leader of the tournament, Kamil Dragun against Alejandro Ramirez. Do we have any new moves there? I see A5 being played.
A5,
so my idea
unexpected.
is actually happening.
Did you say A5?
Yes.
Oh,
A5.
you did say A5, yeah. Wow, so allowing the king to capture on B5, and now it's probably going to lead to the cat versus mouse scenario where White's king will kind of scurry across the board trying to find shelter. I mean, we should note, of course, rook can't take on A5 due to rook take A5, then the rook on E7 would be left hanging. So I think we can expect king take B5, and then, I mean, you would be predicting rook to F3.
And I'm just being told that we have another result in Group B. Andrei Tukhaev won against Tadej Abrahamyan. We talked about the rook endgames. It was a matter of technique. And now the game concluded. They are signing the score sheets. Kings in the center. Andrei's position, he may have chances to also be playing for the first spot in the Group B.
Yeah, we can see Tatev there does not seem too happy with the game. It's tough having such a long game and being ground down like this where, I mean, you're defending the whole game, you try and try and try. But Andrei's technique just too strong for Tatev. And yeah, this means that Andrei still has some small chances to fight for first place in Group B. Kamil Dragun trying to push for a win today, but we're not going to have a clinch winner after today.
Yeah, so we have last game happening, Kamil Dragun against Alejandro Ramirez. So maybe let's see the graphics of the results of round 8 in the Group A.
Not sure if we have those graphics prepared. Oh, we do. Round A, we had two decisive games today. Yaroslav Zherebukh unexpectedly defeating the tournament leader Vasif Darbeli, so it's going to make for a very interesting round tomorrow. Also had Jeffrey Zhang defeating Alexander Indjic. Let's take a look at the standings and see who's in contention for first place tomorrow. Vasif Darbeli now tied with Varujan Kobian. I'm sure both players don't want to lose tomorrow. They're either going to go for a win or maybe just take a solid draw and accept a potential playoff. And then we also have Sam Sevian and Yaroslav Zherebukh with some outside chance of getting first place.
And we have to keep in mind that Sam Sevian is playing Vasif tomorrow. So Sam Sevian may be still playing for the first spot in the tournament.
That's a really good point. If Sam wins his game tomorrow, he'll leapfrog Vasif, and he could potentially take clear first if he wins and Kobian loses, or he could have some sort of playoff. So this is what we want to see. We want to see it coming down to the very last round, in this case with 4 players having a shot to take the crown.
Let's take a look at the results of Group B.
Yeah, with one game still pending. Oh, actually, well, the one game that was pending is now over. Tatev Abrahamyan losing to Andrei Sukopin, and impressive play from Dinara Sadua-Kosova defeating Sergei Matsenko. Also had a few relatively quick draws. Josh Friedel drawing JJ Ali Morandi, and Robert Agasarian drawing Vladimir Belis. So let's take a look at the standings and see where this puts us. Kamil Dragun should still be in clear first after this round, as he is playing for a win. If he wins the game, he'll be a full point ahead, only needing a draw tomorrow to get first place. If he draws the game, it's going to be a bit more interesting. But I mean, both both groups coming down to the final day. This is what we wanted to see.
So let's look at the pairings for Group A for last round, round 9 in Group A. We have Jeffrey Zhang playing Benjamin Bog, Rinat Jumabayev playing Alexander Indjic, Babujian playing Daniel Friedman, Vasif Durar-Bailey playing Sam Savian, and last board Peter Prohaska against Yaroslav Zherebukh.
Definitely some exciting matchups for tomorrow in Group A. Let's take a look at the pairings for Group B tomorrow. Also some exciting matchups. Vladimir Balas against Dinara Saduakasova, JJ Ali Morandi against Robert Agasarian, Andrei Sukopin against Josh Riedel, Alejandro Ramirez playing his good friend Tatev Abrahamyan, maybe speculating a quick draw in that game. And then we also have Sergei Matsenko against the tournament leader, Kamil Dragun.
So we have many exciting matches, but no one is a clear winner. So please tune out tomorrow, see what's happening. The game starts at 11 a.m.
And we're going to start the broadcast tomorrow 2 hours earlier at 1:30 p.m. Central Time. Be sure to set your alarm clocks. I know we'll be setting ours as well.
See you tomorrow.
This has been a presentation of the St. Louis Chess Club.